Jack Reacher had a rule: never stay in one place long enough for the dust to settle. But the dust in Redemption, Nevada, seemed to have settled decades ago, burying the town in a fine layer of forgotten silence. He stepped off the Greyhound bus into the searing afternoon heat, the only passenger to disembark for at least 100 miles in either direction. The town was little more than a single main street, a collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled together against the vast, unforgiving desert. A diner, a gas station, a sheriff's office, and a handful of other storefronts with faded paint. It was the perfect picture of nowhere, which usually suited Reacher just fine. He was heading for the diner when he saw the first thing that was wrong. A flatbed truck, a big one, rumbled down a side street, kicking up a plume of that old, settled dust. It was covered with a heavy, dark green tarp, meticulously strapped down. But what caught Reacher's eye were the tires. They were caked in fresh, dark mud. In a town where it hadn't rained in 4 months, mud was an anomaly. And the men in the cab weren't locals. They had the hard, blank expressions of military police, their haircuts severe, their eyes scanning everything and seeing nothing. They didn't belong. Reacher filed the information away and pushed into the diner. The bell above the door chimed a lonely, tinny sound. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried food. A young waitress with weary eyes and a name tag that read Sarah nodded at him from behind the counter. A couple of old-timers sat at a booth, nursing cups of coffee, their conversation dying the moment he walked in. The silence wasn't welcoming. It was heavy, suffocating. "Coffee," Reacher said, taking a seat at the counter. "Black." Sarah poured him a cup from a half-empty pot. Her hand trembled slightly. He watched her in the reflection of the chrome napkin dispenser. Her eyes kept darting toward the window, then to the sheriff's office across the street. "Passing through?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Something like that," Reacher said. "Quiet town." Her laugh was a brittle, humorless sound. "It used to be." Before Reacher could ask what she meant, the bell chimed again. This time, it was a man in a sheriff's uniform. He was big, with a gut that strained the buttons of his shirt and a face that looked permanently sunburned and angry. A name tag read Brody. He didn't look at the old-timers or Sarah. His eyes locked directly onto Reacher. "Don't see many strangers out here," Brody said. It wasn't a question or a greeting. It was an accusation. "Just getting coffee," Reacher replied, not turning from his cup. "We don't have much for tourists," the sheriff continued, stepping closer. His presence filled the small space, smelling of sweat and cheap aftershave. "The bus comes back through at 6 tomorrow morning. I suggest you be on it." Reacher took a slow sip of his coffee. It was bitter, just how he liked it. "That sounds more like an order than a suggestion, Sheriff." "Take it how you like," Brody grunted. "We like to keep things peaceful here in Redemption." But Reacher had already seen enough to know that whatever this town was, it wasn't peaceful. It was scared. He looked past Brody out the window. Another military-style vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows, cruised slowly down the street. It had no license plates. Brody's gaze flickered towards it, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. He was part of it. "I'll keep that in mind," Reacher said. He finished his coffee, left a couple of dollars on the counter, and walked out, feeling Brody's hostile glare on his back. Instead of heading to the cheap motel he'd spotted, he decided to take a walk. He ambled down the main street, his long strides eating up the pavement. He was a man with no destination, which made him impossible to predict. He turned down the same side street where he'd seen the flatbed truck. The mud tracks were still there, leading out of town toward the desolate expanse of the desert. He followed them on foot. The sun beat down relentlessly. An hour later, the town was a small smudge behind him. The tracks led to a hastily erected chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A stark white sign read, "U.S. Government Property, No Trespassing." The fence was new. The posts were freshly sunk, the wire gleaming. Whatever the government was doing here, they were doing it in a hurry. Reacher found a spot where the fence was stretched between two rocky outcrops. He was over it in seconds. Inside, the ground was churned up. More tire tracks, from heavy vehicles and smaller all-terrain types. He followed the signs of activity to a wide, shallow basin. The air here felt different. There was a faint, acrid smell, like burnt electronics. He knelt, running his hand over the disturbed earth. He found shards of something black and metallic. It wasn't steel or aluminum. It was a composite material, incredibly light but strong. It felt advanced. He pocketed a piece. Then he heard the engine. He flattened himself behind a rock just as a Humvee crested the ridge. It came to a stop, and two men in tactical gear got out. They weren't soldiers. They moved with a different kind of purpose, a cold, predatory efficiency. They scanned the area, their eyes missing nothing. "The sweep is complete," one said into a radio. "No further debris found. Site is sterile." "What about the local chatter?" a voice crackled back. "Sheriff is handling it. One old drunk Miller still running his mouth. Brody says he'll be quiet by tonight." "Make sure he is," the radio commanded. "No loose ends." The men got back in the Humvee and drove off. Reacher stayed put until the sound of the engine faded completely. A man named Miller was going to be silenced, and Sheriff Brody was the one arranging it. Reacher headed back toward town. He had a new purpose now. He wasn't just passing through anymore. He was a loose end, and he was about to make them wish they'd never heard of redemption. Back in town, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Reacher went straight to the sheriff's office. It was a small, squat building. Through the window, he could see a young deputy at a desk, looking bored. Brody was nowhere in sight. Reacher walked in. The deputy, whose name tag read Miller, looked up, startled. He was young, maybe 25, with a face that hadn't learned to hide what he was feeling. Right now, he was feeling nervous. "Can I help you?" Miller asked. "I'm looking for Sheriff Brody," Reacher said. "He's out," the deputy stammered. "On patrol." "I'll wait," Reacher said, taking a seat on a hard wooden bench. Miller fidgeted with some papers. He kept glancing at Reacher, then at the clock. The silence stretched. "You're the guy from the diner," Miller said finally. "Brody told you to be on the morning bus." "He did," Reacher agreed. "You should listen to him. It's for your own good." There was a genuine note of warning in his voice. "Is that the same advice you give everyone?" Reacher asked. "Or just the people Brody wants gone?" Miller's face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Reacher said, his voice low and even. "I heard a name out in the desert. Miller. An old drunk who saw something he shouldn't have. I'm guessing that's your father, or your uncle. Brody's going to shut him up tonight. Permanently." The color drained completely from the deputy's face. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Who are you?" "A guy who doesn't like loose ends." Before Miller could respond, the door opened and Brody walked in. He stopped short when he saw Reacher. The anger in his face was immediate and raw. "I thought I told you to make yourself scarce," he snarled. "You did," Reacher said, getting to his feet. He was a head taller than the sheriff and broader. The office suddenly felt very small. "You've got a smart mouth, you know that?" Brody said, resting a hand on the butt of his sidearm. "That's vagrancy, and resisting arrest." "I'm not resisting," Reacher said calmly. "And I'm not a vagrant. I just have questions." "You're under arrest," Brody declared, pulling his gun. Reacher didn't move. He just watched. Brody was sweating now. His bluff called. He wasn't a lawman. He was a thug in a uniform, and he was in over his head. "Put the gun away, Sheriff," Reacher advised. "You're going to need it later." Brody's finger tightened on the trigger, but Deputy Miller stepped between them. "Sheriff, maybe we just let him go," Miller pleaded. "He'll be on the bus." "You stay out of this, kid!" Brody yelled, shoving Miller aside. That was the only opening Reacher needed. He moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. One hand shot out and clamped down on Brody's wrist, twisting it brutally. The gun clattered to the floor. Reacher's other hand grabbed the front of Brody's shirt, pulling him forward and slamming his face into the wall. Brody grunted in pain and slumped, dazed. Reacher picked up the gun and handed it to the stunned deputy. "Where does your relative live, Miller?" Reacher asked, his voice calm, as if nothing had happened. "Old man Miller? He's my grandfather," the deputy whispered, his eyes wide. "He lives in a shack out by the old quarry." "Then that's where we're going," Reacher said, "because the men Brody works for are already on their way." Miller stared at the unconscious sheriff, then at Reacher. He made a decision. He nodded, his jaw set. "My patrol car is out back." They left Brody on the floor of his own office and sprinted to the car. As they sped out of town, kicking up a trail of dust, Reacher saw the same black SUV he'd seen earlier, parked in the shadows near the gas station. Two men in suits stood beside it, watching them go. The hunt was on. The quarry was a dark, gaping mouth on the edge of the desert, a place where the earth had been torn open and abandoned. Old Man Miller's shack was perched precariously near the rim, a ramshackle construction of scrap wood and corrugated tin. A single dim light burned in its window. Deputy Miller killed the engine and the headlights a quarter-mile out, and they approached on foot, moving through the scrub brush under the cold light of a full moon. The silence was absolute, the kind that makes your ears ring. "He's a good man," Miller said, his voice tight with anxiety. He saw something the other night. A flash in the sky, then a crash. He went to look. He said men were there already, like they were waiting for it. They told him to leave, to forget what he saw." "He didn't forget," Reacher stated. "He can't," Miller said. "He was a reporter once, a long time ago. He believes people have a right to know." They were 50 yards from the shack when Reacher held up a hand, stopping them. He had heard something, the faint crunch of gravel, not from the shack, but from the darkness to their left. He scanned the shadows. Nothing. But he knew they were there. "They're already here," Reacher whispered. "Two of them, maybe three. They're waiting for us, or for him to come out." "What do we do?" Miller asked, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. "We changed the game," Reacher replied. "They're expecting a direct approach. We're going to give them the opposite." He led Miller on a wide circling path, using the contours of the land and the deep shadows cast by the quarry's edge for cover. They came up behind the shack. The back wall had a single small, grimy window. Reacher peered through. An old man with a shock of white hair sat at a table, a bottle of whiskey and a glass in front of him. He was staring at the door, waiting. Reacher tapped gently on the glass. The old man jumped, spinning around. Reacher put a finger to his lips, then pointed to Deputy Miller. Recognition and relief flooded the old man's face. He shuffled over and unlatched the back door. "Johnny, what are you doing sneaking around back here?" he rasped. "Grandpa, we have to get you out of here," Miller said urgently. "They're coming for you." "They're already here," the old man said, his eyes surprisingly sharp and sober. "Saw them pull up an hour ago. Parked their fancy car down the road. Been waiting for them to make a move." He looked at Reacher. "Who's this?" "He's a friend," Miller said. "They think you're just a drunk old man," Reacher said. "They're underestimating you." "Most people do," Old Man Miller said with a grim smile. He reached under his table and pulled out an object wrapped in an old blanket. He unwrapped it. It was a piece of wreckage, larger than the one Reacher had found, a curved section of fuselage about 2 feet long. Embedded in its surface was a small intact data port. "I grabbed this before they ran me off. Figured it might be important." "It is," Reacher said. "It's the reason they want you dead." A floorboard creaked on the front porch, then a heavy thump against the door. "Sheriff's office," a voice called out, cold and official. It wasn't Brody's. "Mr. Miller, we need to talk to you." Reacher looked at the deputy and his grandfather. "There's no back way out of this, is there?" Old Man Miller shook his head. Just cliffs behind us. Okay, Reacher said, his mind already working, calculating angles and possibilities. He handed the piece of wreckage back to the old man. Keep that safe. Miller, you and your grandfather get into the bedroom. Bar the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear. What are you going to do? The deputy asked. I'm going to have a conversation, Reacher said. He moved to the center of the small room and kicked over the table, sending the bottle and glass smashing to the floor. He doused the single lantern, plunging the shack into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint moonlight filtering through the dirty windows. Then he stood beside the door, flattened against the wall, and waited. The silence outside stretched. They were confused. They'd expected compliance, or perhaps a feeble, drunken protest. Not this. Crash. The front door splintered inward, kicked off its hinges. A figure dressed in black tactical gear, holding a silenced pistol, stepped through the doorway. He was a silhouette against the moonlit landscape. He paused, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. It was a fatal mistake. Reacher exploded from the shadows. He didn't use a weapon. He was the weapon. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, a battering ram of bone and muscle. The man flew backward, the air forced from his lungs in a sharp gasp. He landed hard on the porch, his gun skittering away into the darkness. A second man was right behind him. This one was smarter. He didn't enter. He fired 2 quick, muffled shots into the dark space where his partner had been standing. The bullets thudded into the far wall. Reacher was already moving, low and fast. He scooped up the first man's pistol from the porch. It felt solid and balanced in his hand. He didn't fire. He didn't need to. He knew their positions now. One on the porch, one just off it. There was probably a third, providing overwatch. He heard a voice from the darkness, the same cold, controlled tone as before. You in the shack, you are interfering with a federal operation. Surrender now. Reacher didn't answer. He stayed low, listening. He could hear the first man groaning, trying to get his breath back. He could hear the second man's soft footsteps on the gravel as he repositioned. There's nowhere to run, the voice said. Reacher decided to create a diversion. He picked up a loose piece of wood from the shattered door and hurled it through the side window. The glass shattered with a loud crash. The second man immediately fired 2 shots in that direction. While he was distracted, Reacher moved. He vaulted over the porch railing on the opposite side, landing silently in the scrub brush. He was a ghost in the night. He circled around, the pistol held steady in a 2-handed grip. He saw the second man crouched near the corner of the shack, his attention still focused on the broken window. Reacher closed the distance in 3 long, silent strides. He brought the butt of the pistol down hard on the base of the man's skull. The man collapsed without a sound, a puppet with its strings cut. 2 down. Now for the third, the overwatch. He would be further back, probably with a rifle, watching the whole scene. Reacher scanned the rocky terrain, the dark shapes of the quarry equipment. And then he saw it. A faint glint of light, a reflection from a rifle scope. The man was positioned on a pile of discarded mining equipment about 60 yards away, giving him a clear line of sight to the shack's front door. Reacher began to move again, a shadow among shadows. He didn't run. He flowed across the landscape, using every rock, every dip in the ground as cover. The man with the rifle was focused on the shack, waiting for a target to appear. He would never see Reacher coming. He was 20 feet away when the man sensed something. He started to turn. Reacher charged the last few feet. He hit the man's rifle, knocking it aside as it fired, the shot going wild, echoing across the quarry. He drove his knee into the man's side, then followed with a short, brutal right hook to the jaw. The man's head snapped back, and he went down, unconscious. 3 down. Reacher stood for a moment, listening to the silence of the desert. It was over, for now. He collected their weapons and communications gear. He went back to the shack. It's clear, he called out. The bedroom door creaked open. Deputy Miller emerged, his own gun still raised, his eyes wide. His grandfather was right behind him, clutching the piece of wreckage. "What happened?" Miller asked, looking at the unconscious bodies. "They were clumsy," Reacher said, checking the men for any identification. He found none. No wallets, no badges, just sterile professional operators. "They underestimated us." He looked at the piece of wreckage in Old Man Miller's hands. "What is this thing? What crashed out there?" "I don't know for sure," the old man said. "It wasn't a plane, no wings. It was shaped like a wedge, and it moved without a sound until it started to fall. It was a drone, I think, but bigger than any I've ever read about. And it wasn't just metal. It felt strange." Reacher examined the data port. It was a standard high-speed connection, but reinforced, shielded against electromagnetic pulses. Military grade, top secret. "This is our leverage," Reacher said. "They don't just want you quiet. They want this back, desperately." "So what's the plan?" Deputy Miller asked. He looked at Reacher as if he held all the answers. "They'll send more people," Reacher said. "Better ones. The 3 I took down were the cleanup crew. Now they'll send the hunters. We can't stay here, and we can't go back to town. Brody will have it locked down." He thought for a moment. They had a piece of evidence that the government would kill for, and now they were fugitives in a town controlled by the very people hunting them. They needed a place to hide, a place to think. "Is there anywhere else?" Reacher asked. "Anywhere they wouldn't think to look?" Old Man Miller's eyes lit up with a spark of defiance. "There's the old silver mine, abandoned for 50 years. Tunnels run for miles under these hills. They'll never find us in there. And there's more. There's an old shortwave radio in the foreman's office. Still works, if you can get power to it." "Then that's where we're going," Reacher decided. "We're not going to run. We're going to dig in, and we're going to show them what happens when they try to bury the truth in a place called redemption." They gathered what they could: water, the weapons from the downed agents, and the precious piece of wreckage. Under the cover of darkness, the 3 of them, the drifter, the small-town cop, and the old reporter, disappeared into the mouth of the abandoned mine, into the dark heart of the desert, preparing for a war they had no choice but to fight. The air in the mine was cold and damp, smelling of wet rock and a century of stillness. They used a single flashlight to navigate the main tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Old Man Miller led them to the foreman's office, a small chamber carved out of the rock, not far from the entrance. It was surprisingly well preserved. A thick wooden desk, a rusted filing cabinet, and in the corner, covered in a thick layer of dust, the shortwave radio. "We'll need a power source," Deputy Miller said, looking at the ancient equipment. "The patrol car," Reacher stated. "The battery." It was a risk, but a necessary one. While the Millers set up a small, defensible camp in the office, Reacher slipped back out of the mine. The landscape was eerily quiet. There was no sign of more agents, but Reacher knew they were out there, regrouping, planning. He moved quickly to the deputy's car, popped the hood, and expertly disconnected the battery. It was heavy, but manageable. Carrying it back to the mine, he felt the weight of their situation. This wasn't just a fight for their lives anymore. It was about the truth. The government had lost something here, something they were willing to kill to keep secret. That piece of wreckage was the key. Back in the office, they hooked up the battery to the radio. With a crackle of static, the old machine came to life. Old Man Miller, his hands surprisingly steady, began to work the dials. "Who are we going to call?" the deputy asked. "The state police? The FBI? How do we know who to trust?" "We don't," Reacher said. "Brody is a county sheriff. These agents are federal. This cover-up goes high. Calling the authorities might just be calling the people who sent them." "He's right," Old Man Miller said, not looking up from the radio. "You can't fight the system from inside the system. You have to go outside." He continued to tune the radio, listening intently to the static. "I used to know a guy, a real journalist, from the old school, ran an independent newswire, never backed down from a story. If he's still alive, and if I can find him on these frequencies, he'll listen." While the old man searched for his contact, Reacher and the deputy planned their defense. The mine had one main entrance. It was their biggest vulnerability. Reacher scouted the tunnels around the foreman's office. He found a secondary ventilation shaft that led to the surface, narrow and steep but a possible escape route if they needed it. He also found loose rock and old timbers, perfect for creating a rock slide to block the main tunnel. They had a fortress of a sort. Hours passed. The battery was draining slowly. Then, through the static, a voice. Faint, but clear. Old Man Miller's face lit up. He began to speak, his voice low and urgent, relaying the story of the crash, the strange wreckage, the agents, the dead. He didn't give their location. He just told the story. I have proof, he finished. A piece of the machine, with a data port. There was a long pause on the other end. Then the voice came back. Where are you, Frank? Can't say, Old Man Miller replied. They're hunting us. But I need you to do something. Look up Project Icarus. It was a DARPA program from about 10 years ago. Advanced surveillance platform. They claim they shut it down. I don't think they did. I'll look into it, the voice promised. Stay safe, Frank. The connection went dead. Old Man Miller leaned back, exhausted but triumphant. The fuse is lit, he said. It was then that they heard it. The distant sound of engines. Multiple vehicles approaching the quarry. They found the car, Deputy Miller said. They were bound to, Reacher replied. They'll know we're in the area. They'll search the quarry first, then the mine. He looked at the entrance to their small office. It's time. Reacher and the deputy worked quickly, piling rocks and wedging old timbers into the ceiling of the main tunnel, just beyond a sharp bend. It was a deadfall trap, crude but effective. Once it was set, they retreated to the office. They'll come in slow and careful, Reacher said. A 4-man team most likely. 2 up front, 2 in the rear. They'll be expecting a fight, but not this. They didn't have to wait long. They heard the crunch of boots on the gravel floor of the tunnel. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. The team moved with practiced silence, their weapons ready. They passed the foreman's office, heading deeper into the mine. They were checking for anyone hiding in the side tunnels. Reacher gave them 30 yards. Then he nodded to Deputy Miller. The deputy fired his pistol once. The target wasn't the men. It was a key support timber in Reacher's trap. The shot echoed like a cannon in the confined space. The timber splintered. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan, the ceiling gave way. Tons of rock and earth came crashing down, completely sealing the tunnel. The flashlight beams of the men on the other side vanished behind a wall of impenetrable rock and dust. But 2 of the agents had not yet passed the bend. They were trapped on the same side as Reacher. They reacted instantly, turning and opening fire toward the office. Bullets ricocheted off the rock walls. Reacher pushed the 2 Millers to the floor. "Stay down!" he yelled. He peered around the edge of the doorway. One agent was taking cover behind an old mining cart. The other was pressed against the tunnel wall. They were pinned, but so was he. It was a stalemate. Reacher knew a direct assault was suicide. He needed another way. He looked up. The rock ceiling in the office was crisscrossed with cracks. He remembered the ventilation shaft. "The shaft," he whispered to the deputy. "Give me cover." Miller nodded, his face grim. He began firing methodically toward the tunnel, forcing the agents to keep their heads down. The noise was deafening. Under the cover of the gunfire, Reacher scrambled up the rock face inside the office, finding handholds and footholds in the dark. He pulled himself into the narrow ventilation shaft. It was a tight squeeze, filled with cobwebs and loose dirt. He climbed upward, into the suffocating darkness, until he saw a faint circle of light above him. The surface. He emerged into the cool night air, about 100 yards from the mine's main entrance. He could see a black van and another SUV parked nearby. A man stood by the van, speaking into a radio. He was the commander, the man Reacher had seen earlier in town, Stone. Reacher moved silently, circling around behind him. Stone was focused on the chaos at the mine entrance, listening to the reports from his trapped men. "What's your status?" Stone demanded into his radio. Tunnel collapsed. 2 of us are cut off from the main team. We're engaged with the targets in a side chamber. Hold your position, Stone ordered. We'll blast our way through. He turned, as if sensing something, and found himself face to face with Reacher. Stone was a professional. There was no fear in his eyes, only surprise, quickly replaced by cold fury. He didn't reach for his sidearm. He was a hand-to-hand combatant. He lunged, his movements fluid and precise. But Reacher had fought men like this before, men trained by the government to be perfect killing machines. Stone was fast, but Reacher was stronger. He met the attack head-on. It was a brutal, silent ballet of violence under the moonlight. A block, a parry, a strike. Stone aimed for nerve clusters and weak points. Reacher aimed to break things. He absorbed a painful jab to the ribs and answered with an elbow strike that shattered Stone's nose. Blood sprayed. Stone staggered back, enraged. He came at Reacher again, a knife suddenly in his hand. The blade flashed. Reacher sidestepped, letting the knife slash empty air. He grabbed Stone's wrist, twisting it until the bone snapped. Stone cried out, a raw animal sound of pain. The knife fell. Reacher finished it with a single devastating punch to the temple. Stone crumpled to the ground, his war over. Reacher picked up Stone's radio. "The team in the tunnel," he said, perfectly mimicking Stone's cold, commanding tone. "Fall back to the entrance. The targets are escaping through a secondary exit." "I'm in pursuit." He heard the confused reply. "Sir, we're taking fire." "Disengage and fall back." "That's an order," Reacher commanded. He listened as the gunfire from the mine ceased. The 2 agents, following their commander's orders, would be retreating. Reacher went back to the ventilation shaft. "Miller, it's me. They're pulling back." A few minutes later, the deputy helped his grandfather out of the shaft. They looked at the unconscious commander on the ground. "It's over," Deputy Miller said, breathing heavily. "Not yet," Reacher said. He looked at the wreckage in Old Man Miller's hand. "This started with a secret. It ends when the secret is told." Using Stone's high-tech radio, they found a secure military frequency, a channel reserved for the top brass at the Pentagon. It was a long shot. Reacher keyed the mic. He didn't give his name. "This is an open message regarding Project Icarus," he said, his voice hard and clear. "An experimental surveillance drone, carrying a next-generation weapons guidance system, crashed tonight outside Redemption, Nevada. A covert cleanup team has executed at least 1 civilian and attempted to execute 2 others to ensure a cover-up. We have the drone's flight recorder. We have the commander of the cleanup crew. And we have a story that a certain journalist is about to broadcast to the world." He paused. "You have 1 hour to send a legitimate, uniformed military recovery team to this location, not another Black Ops crew. You will arrest Sheriff Brody for conspiracy to commit murder. You will open a full investigation. If you fail to do this, the contents of this flight recorder go public. The clock is ticking." He shut off the radio. They waited. It was the longest hour of their lives. They tied up Stone and the other 3 agents Reacher had disabled. Just as the sun began to rise, they heard the sound of helicopters. Not the silent black helicopters of the cleanup crew, but 2 big, loud, olive-drab Chinooks. They landed in a whirlwind of dust, and a platoon of U.S. Army Rangers in full combat gear poured out. A distinguished-looking officer with a star on his collar approached them, his hand not on his weapon, but raised in a gesture of peace. The officer listened to their story. He took possession of the wreckage and the captured agents. He promised a full investigation. He looked at Reacher with a curious, respectful expression. "We owe you our thanks," the general said. "You averted a disaster." "I was just passing through," Reacher said. As the army secured the scene and a medical team attended to Old Man Miller, Reacher simply walked away. Deputy Miller caught up with him at the edge of the quarry. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Don't know," Reacher said. "There's a bus at 6. "You could stay," Miller offered. "They're probably going to make me the new sheriff. I could use someone like you." Reacher looked at the town of Redemption, now bathed in the clean light of a new day. The dust was finally being stirred up. The secrets were coming out. His work was done. "I'm not the settling kind," he said. He shook the young deputy's hand. "You'll do fine. You're a good cop." And with that, Jack Reacher turned and walked down the long, empty road, a solitary figure against the vast desert landscape, leaving the town of Redemption to find its own.